Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so this is a very brief video on Mukhtasar Al Quduri, just to introduce it to you. So essentially, Mukhtasar Al Quduri is a primer fiqh text in the Hanafi school. What this means is it's the first book studied in any given science. So in this case, in the science of fiqh, in the science of Hanafi Fiqh, this is generally one of the first books that is taught. Sometimes it's the second book or the third book, and that's generally so Madaris can teach the students the foundational knowledge in the English language with short text, keeping the rulings very simple, and then students work on to a classical work. Because with the classical work, sometimes it takes a bit more to understand the rulings, a bit difficult to read the Arabic, translate the Arabic. But essentially, Mukhtasar Al Quduri is a primer fiqh text, and it's one of those works which is core in the Hanafi school. So Mukhtasar means abridged. In other words, for something to be, maybe a large compendium, multiple volumes, if you can imagine, and then somebody decides to produce a work which is to abridge it, which is to make a Mukhtasar. In other words, will just to give you the core rulings from this whole voluminous work. Okay, and Quduri refers to the author, name of the author. So the author's full name is Abu Hassan Ahmad. So his name is Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Ahmad Al Quduri. And it's this nisbah that he's known by. Now, there's three opinions of on the origins of his name. So either they say his occupation, so the Quduri is a pot maker or a potter. So they said that was his occupation, and due to his occupation, that's how he became known, because his name is Ahmad, so that people could recognize who he was, and he was from the city of Baghdad. So in order to distinguish him, give him some specificity, they called him by his occupation. The second opinion is, well, Quduri is actually an area of Baghdad. In other words, like a locality, a town, a village, a couple of streets, which is known as Quduri, and that's where he's from. And then the third opinion is it's an area in Baghdad in which the pots were made. So quite similar to how you might have a financial district, and then you got your other sort of warehouse industry type, and maybe you got your agriculture on one side of the city. Very similar to that. So in Baghdad, you've got an area where that's where all the potters do their stuff, and that's where he was from. But it doesn't really matter. So we just know that it relates to pot making, and it might be because that was his occupation. It might be because that's the area in which he was born in, or maybe it was just the name of the local area. Okay, so he was born in 362 AH, 362 after Hijri, which means he's a very early Hanafi scholar. Between him and Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, there are 5 teachers. Now, if you're studying fiqh in the Dars Nizami, or under a teacher, then you would have by now had an introduction to the Hanafi school. If you haven't, it's very important you understand what the Hanafi school is, the core workings of it, key terminology, key people. So Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani was one of the chief students of Imam Abu Hanifa, and he in himself was so vast in knowledge that he was also classed as a mujtahid. So he could have actually gone ahead separately and said, I'm going to set up my own madhab, my own way, my own school. But he decided, like his companion Qadi Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, to stay with Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi. What we're saying is, now you've got this one of the chief students of, and he was quite young, in comparison to Qadi Abu Yusuf, in comparison to Imam Zafar, he was quite young, and he essentially is one of those who then really takes on the school and really spreads that knowledge. And what we're saying is, between him now and Imam Quduri, Ahmad al Quduri, there are 5 teachers. So he's a very early Hanafi, in other words. Otherwise, maybe perhaps once you come across other texts and you look at when these people were born, they might have been born 500 years later, 1,000 years later, and then one might sort of ask, oh, well, who were the early authorities? Who are the early Hanafi scholars who have where do we get this knowledge from? One of these is Imam al Quduri. He was, in fact, for the whole of Iraq, he was actually the head faqih. In other words, he was a scholar who truly understood fiqh and that time period, which means, in terms, and this is not just Tahara and Salah, the 5 pillars, the science of fiqh, it goes across everything in life, whether it's marriage, divorce, inheritance, transactions, many other smaller chapters as well. So he was basically somebody who was well versed in that. Just to rewind a little bit again, back to the time of Imam Abu Hanifa. So when he and his school were formulating the fiqh rulings, his student Imam Muhammad, now he was one of those students who wrote the rulings down. You can imagine Imam Abu Hanifa with a vast number of scholars, around 40 scholars from all, each one of them had a or was a master in one of the Islamic sciences, and they're all discussing and conversing and trying to get down to what the particular ruling should be for a particular scenario and what evidence is based upon. So as these conversations are going on, Imam Muhammad is one of those students who's writing this down. However, when we say writing it down, his writing was more like notes, and wherever he could find some space on his notepad or writing material, whatever it could be, he's making these notes. And then we know from Imam Muhammad, he goes on to study also with Imam Malik as well. So we know he's a keen student who's making lots and lots of notes and saying this is what the hadith is, or this is what the ruling is, and this is what the opinions are, and this is why the opinions are. So he basically compiles 6 books. These 6 books are known as Zahir al-Riwaya. So the first is Al-Mabsut, also known as Al-Asl. Then Jami al-Sagir. Then Al-Jami al-Kabir. That's the third. The fourth, As-Siyar al-Sagir. And then As-Siyar al-Kabir. And finally Al-Ziyadat. And if you want to look into these 6 books, then I suggest you do your own research on them. Some of these books are actually still available today. So these 6 now, Imam Muhammad, he's got these 6 books, and these are the books that are being taught throughout the Hanafi world, especially Al-Jami al-Sagir. Al-Jami al-Sagir is like the, before Quduri, that is the Quduri. That's what's being taught. However, it was clear that this Hanafi fiqh, the knowledge of the school, right, of the fiqh rulings was quite sporadic. So yes, you'll find rulings in Jami al-Sagir, but across some of the other books by Imam Muhammad, you might find an ad hoc ruling here and there, or maybe there's some clarification, another opinion. So this is where Imam Quduri comes in now. He basically decided to bring them all together and lay out the rulings and opinions in a systematic fashion. And what he does is his aim is now, I want to present this knowledge, fiqh rulings, Hanafi fiqh rulings, in a presentable format, which will give the reader or the student precise knowledge that's not confusing, and also is going to mention the different opinions, if there is a different opinion, and sometimes even then mentioning the preferred opinion. And you can imagine now, Imam Muhammad, it's not as though the Hanafi school sort of say, right, so for these 3 months we're going to totally focus on tahara. Let's get tahara done. But it was a daily occurrence whenever, after the core principles of tahara, when new scenarios, situations, questions came up, then they would discuss this. And those notes by Imam Muhammad, weren't sort of contained. He didn't have a notepad just for tahara, for example. So what Imam Quduri does then is he's basically going to say, okay, we're going to start off with Kitab al-Tahara, and we'll break it up again. Wudu, ghusl, tayammum, haid, types of water, etc., etc. So this is what he does. And then from there you've got salah, and it continues on. And this is actually one of the benchmarks of Islamic texts as well, because most texts, when you open them, it starts off with tahara. So Imam Quduri, he puts himself to work, and this actually becomes a milestone. And it's a milestone because none of the other schools, the other madhabs, had such a book. It was difficult to sort of access that school's knowledge in a single book or with a single teacher, because the knowledge is so vast and it's quite sporadic. And his book was then so popular amongst the seminaries that it soon was called Al-Kitab. In other words, the book. Every Hanafi knew Al-Kitab was in reference to Mukhtasar Al Quduri, and every madrasa began to teach it, because it meant that now we've got our students, we can say to them, okay, first few weeks we're doing Kitab al-Tahara. You do the whole Kitab al-Tahara, and as a teacher, then I've taught them what I need to do. I've taught them what I need to teach them when it comes to the Hanafi school. Yep, and then you move on to the others. Now, I guess one thing with Quduri is that, in hindsight, it doesn't actually contain every single ruling or every single scenario. So even when you're looking at the sunnahs of wudu, for example, you're going to find a lot of them in there. Many of them are in there, but maybe you're familiar with some that have not been listed. So there are So this is something that you might find. And then also when it comes to maybe new scenarios, or maybe having another understanding of the Islamic rulings. And again, this is a muqtasar, so he doesn't provide the evidences for such rulings. It's just giving you the ruling. It's telling you these are the 6 preconditions of salah. These are the 6 conditions within salah. These are the fard of wudu. These are the sunnah of wudu, and then a few exceptions to the rules. This is what he's giving. He's giving you the muqtasar, the crux of the knowledge. There's other key Hanafi texts known as Kanzul Daqa'iq, Sharh al-Waqaya, and Al-Mukhtar, and many others as well. If you begin to, if this is the beginning of your journey, then this journey is a long journey in truly understanding Hanafi Fiqh. And then also what I would add is that, remember, this is a muqtasar, it's just giving you the rulings. For a student to complete Quduri, it means that you've been taught foundational fiqh rulings. It's by no means makes you a faqih, because what you don't know is the why. You don't know what the evidence is. You don't know what the usul principle being used is. You don't know what all the different opinions were, and many things like this. And that's why, as a student, you have to continue studying to start to unlock these. And then you've even got comparative fiqh. What do the Shafi'i say? What do the Maliki say? What's the difference there? Why do they say that? Maybe looking at Hadith Sharif, which some may claim that Imam Abu Hanifa wasn't familiar with or aware of, and really understanding why the Hanafis are saying such, and what's the proof for it. Okay, so finally, a commentary on Mukhtasar Al Quduri. One of the famous ones is Al Lubab, which means the essence, and this is by Al Maidani. And Al Maidani essentially does a commentary on Al Quduri, and he provides additional rulings. He'll also list out the Muftabihi, which is a preferred ruling, and then also he'll sometimes share legal evidence. So the recommendation usually is do Quduri once with the teacher, understand it, and then when you do it again, because it works like this, you can't just do it once. You don't return all the knowledge first time. Then second time, do the Lubab, which means you're doing Quduri again with some additional commentary, giving you additional rulings, explaining things, telling the preferred ruling, sometimes some evidence too, and that means you've done an additional text, but also you're covering Quduri again. Some seminaries, they might decide to maybe just go straight to Al-Lubab, and I think that's fine, as long as the text you're using maybe differentiates between what's Quduri and what's a commentary. Sometimes it's inline commentary, so it's difficult to work out. Sometimes it's quite clear depending on the publisher. And it could be either, but I think it just helps in you as a student knowing that, I see, so this is what Imam Quduri says, and this is what Al-Baydani says. Imam Al-Quduri, he also had other works too. Some of the other popular works include Tajreed. Tajreed is a comparative fiqh manual between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is, and it's in 10 volumes. So you can see the vastness of his knowledge. So he's doing comparative fiqh between these two great schools. And then he has Taqrib, and Taqrib mentions the different opinions between Imam Abu Hanifa and his students, the Sahibain, namely Imam Qadi Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. So essentially, I think that's probably all you need to know about Quduri. In terms of the text itself, it is quite detailed. The copy I'm currently using has 671 pages. It pretty much covers most aspects of daily life or Muslim life, all sorts of topics in there. Generally, when you buy a copy, the publishers will have a scholar as well who will add a commentary, sometimes providing additional evidences or different wordings from manuscripts. So that's sometimes helpful as well. And then finally, just to say that when you do, if you are studying this, then this is a useful text for you to build your fiqh vocabulary too. So when your teacher is translating, then it's always helpful to, word by word, start translating, start picking up the particles and the common terminology. So you don't have to, once that becomes separate, once you understand that that's second nature, then it means you don't have to worry about that, because the first time you look at it, it's just words, it's just, scribbles on a paper. I don't know what it says, can't even read it. But soon after, once you get used to some of the words, then you realize, okay, now 50% I know this, the other 50% I don't know, I can use a dictionary. And then as your vocabulary increases, then sentence by sentence you can start making sense of the sentence. With Quduri, you'll sometimes find certain phraseology or maybe words are being used and it doesn't make sense in the context, and this is why it's important to have a teacher. And again, I guess that's the other thing, you've got to remember that paper was scarce. Not everybody could afford to be a scholar or go into learning. You had to work and support your family. So these works were written for students of knowledge. They weren't written to be in a library somewhere accessible by the masses. It was written for, I know there's a seminary, there's a few seminaries in Baghdad, a few in Damascus, etc., etc. It's made for these for these places here. So I hope that was beneficial.
And if you'd like an introduction to another primer, then leave a comment below, and then inshallah, if it's a text I've covered or an author, a scholar that I am aware of, I've been taught on who he was, his works, then leave a comment again, and inshallah, I can go ahead, create a video for you. If there's other content that you'd be interested in, then also we can do that. I am looking to make a video on an introduction to Sarf. I have noticed that many students will go into Sarf, and one of the number one complaints is not knowing